In the spring of 1908, in a small Austrian town, the local postmaster asked a young man if he would be willing to work in the postal industry. In the postmaster's eyes, the boy's circumstances were truly pitiful. He was only 18 years old, and both of his parents had passed away, leaving him to rely on a small inheritance and survivor's benefits. But to the postmaster's surprise, this young man refused his kind offer. The postmaster asked, "Then how will you make a living?" The young man's name was Adolf Hitler, and he replied, "My greatest dream in life is to become a great painter." Hitler was born in 1889 in a small border town in Austria. This future leader of Germany was not even German initially. It is important to understand the relationship between Austria and Germany. These were two countries of the same language and ethnicity, with German as the official language and the German people as the predominant ethnic group. Throughout history, the German people had established many states, the two most powerful of which were Prussia and Austria. In the 19th century, the Iron Chancellor of Prussia, Bismarck, unified the various German states and established the German Empire, the precursor to the Germany we know today. But in this process, Bismarck was unable to incorporate Austria into the German domain. Thereafter, the two countries remained independent, but their close cultural and ethnic ties kept the relationship very close, and there were constant calls for the two to merge and form a greater Germany. When Hitler learned about these facts in his high school classroom, he quickly came to see Germany as his spiritual homeland. As he himself said, Germany was the object of his childhood dreams and secret love. This way of thinking was not uncommon in Austria and was quite understandable. After all, Hitler was a German, and his longing for a strong, unified German nation-state was quite natural. Hitler's ancestors had been farmers for generations. His father, Alois, was the first in the family to venture out, and through his efforts, he became a mid-level civil servant in the Austrian customs service. This was a remarkable achievement at the time. Alois's rags to riches story made him have high expectations for his children. Before Hitler was born, his two brothers and one sister had all died prematurely. Hitler was the first child his mother gave birth to who survived. One can imagine that for such a rare son, Alois's expectations and desire for control would be very high. He hoped that Hitler would follow in his footsteps and become a civil servant, but he was soon disappointed, as Hitler's aspirations lay elsewhere. In his youth, Hitler's greatest passions were history and painting. He loved the heroic stories of German history, which instilled in him a deep pride in his nation. His love for painting, on the other hand, was innate, and although he had never received systematic professional art education, he was utterly captivated by it. However, Alois was furious about this and resolutely refused, declaring, "As long as I'm alive, you will never become a painter." This led to countless arguments between them, but neither could convince the other. The turning point came when Hitler was 14 years old, and his father passed away. There was no longer anyone to stop Hitler from pursuing his dream. He dropped out of high school and returned home, spending his days painting and his nights going to the theater, living a life of leisure. It wasn't until he was 17 that he decided to apply to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. When he bid farewell to his hometown and set out for the capital, he had no idea that Vienna would change everything. Vienna was a world-renowned center of music, as well as a hub of extravagant living. Palatial residences dotted the city, and lavish parties were held daily. At first, Hitler was enthralled by Vienna's splendor and opulence, enjoying going to the theater in fine attire. He later recalled, "When I heard Wagner's music, I felt as if I were hearing the melodies of a world that had already passed away." This was a world of deities and heroes, struggle and sacrifice, victory and death. The heroic figures in Wagner's works were often lonely individuals who dared to challenge the mundane world, or pure saviors, and this held a strong appeal for Hitler. He admired heroes, and also yearned to become one, and Wagner's anti-Semitism and nationalism also subtly influenced him. However, this carefree life of going to the theater soon came to an end. Hitler failed to gain admission to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. Without any formal art education or guidance from masters, he was able to produce some works, showing he had a certain talent. But his talent was not high enough for him to be self-taught. Moreover, the Vienna Academy tended to favor students skilled in portraiture, but Hitler was more adept at painting architecture. These factors led to his rejection. Hitler later reflected, "I had thought passing the exam would be as easy as playing a game." Shut out. He felt like a bolt from the blue had struck him, for he had been convinced he would succeed. The rejection forced Hitler to confront the cold reality, and an even greater blow was yet to come. His mother fell ill with cancer, and in order to pay for her treatment, the family had exhausted most of their savings. Hitler returned home, keeping constant vigil by his mother's side, but to no avail. As she passed away in the winter of 1907, Hitler was devastated with grief. The doctor recalled, "I have witnessed many deathbed scenes, but I have never seen anyone as sorrowful as Hitler." From then on, Hitler was alone. He had lost his dream, his family, and his source of income, but he had not completely given up hope. He picked himself up and returned to Vienna, determined to reapply to the Art Academy. He wrote, "These obstacles will not make me surrender. I must break through them." However, his last glimmer of hope and passion was destined to fade away in Vienna, for this opulent metropolis had completely different meanings for the rich and the poor. Hitler had only seen its glamorous side before, but it was the dark and ugly side that would truly change him. This time in Vienna, he felt a completely different impression, hardly socializing and instead focusing on making money to make ends meet. He often worked tirelessly, taking on the most arduous jobs. He had been a day laborer, cleared snow from the streets, and sold landscape paintings in the city center, hoping someone would recognize his talent. However, these efforts did not pay off, and he could not even escape hunger. His second attempt to gain admission to the Art Academy also failed, and all he received was a cold rejection letter. The door to his dream was now firmly closed. In his desperation, Hitler witnessed another side of Vienna. In the shadow of the grand mansions, the poor lived in deprivation and hopelessness. This stark contrast left a lasting impression on Hitler's mind and formed his deep empathy for the lower classes. Years later, as the head of state, when he returned to his old haunts, his resentment still lingered. He recalled, "Whenever the privileged class passed by, we had to take off our hats, but they never looked at us directly, only leaving behind a few sarcastic remarks." It was these experiences that made Hitler develop a special sympathy for the lower classes, for he had once been one of them, enduring all they had endured. After a period of struggle, Hitler finally managed to eke out a meager living. His paintings sold well in art materials clubs and the interior decoration market, and he moved into a cheap apartment called the Men's Home. This place was home to many low-income but somewhat cultured men, who often gathered in the reading room to discuss politics. Whenever the discussions began, the atmosphere would become unusually heated, and Hitler was always present. He was passionate about speech-making and debate, loved to express his views, and was a veritable keyboard politician of the time. During this period, Hitler's political views were basically formed, and he gradually became an extreme nationalist. On the one hand, he firmly believed that his own nation was the most superior, and on the other hand, he was deeply dissatisfied with Austria's multi-ethnic coexistence, believing that this hybrid corrupted German culture and was a desecration of racial purity. As a person whose life had not gone well, he began to ponder the root causes of social ills. However, Hitler had never received systematic, professional political education, and his thoughts were largely derived from street talk and all kinds of newspaper pamphlets, often superficial and lacking depth. In Hitler's view, the secret to a nation's strength lay in territorial expansion and the seizure of living space. Internally, it required the elimination of inferior races to maintain the so-called purity of the elite. Influenced by anti-Semitism, Hitler saw the Jews as the core of all conspiracies, believing that the Jews were plundering through capitalism and agitating communism, using the banner of national equality to cover up their despicable bloodline. Hitler had read some Marxist works, but he did not appreciate their analysis of capital and class, and was more interested in their connection between Jews and communism. He found that Marx, the German workers' movement leader Rosa Luxemburg, and the Russian Trotsky were all Jews, so he equated Jews with communism and saw them as one and the same. Hitler could only view the world through the narrow lens of nationalism, inevitably leading him astray. In 1913, Hitler came to Germany, the country of his dreams. He spent more than a year in Munich, still alone and unknown, harboring deep resentment towards the world that had rejected him. But the outbreak of World War I opened up a new path for him. Modern people tend to instinctively resist war, but in Germany in 1914, people saw war as the ultimate solution to all problems, joyfully welcoming its arrival. A newspaper at the time wrote, "We are experiencing the rebirth and renaissance of a nation." In this atmosphere of high excitement, Hitler was also extraordinarily exhilarated. He described feeling a storm of intense emotions, joining the war-supporting mass rallies and singing the Rheinlied with thousands of others. Soon after, he set out for the recruitment point with a full heart, becoming a German soldier. At 25, Hitler found his first true purpose and sense of belonging in life. Hitler's unit was deployed to the Rhine region, and as the train passed through Niederwald, he saw the towering Germania monument, the German goddess holding a crown in one hand and a sword in the other, symbolizing the German Empire. The evening sun shone on the statue, making it appear even more sacred. All the soldiers, including Hitler, cheered. They were still young then, harboring hopes for the future, unaware of the hell they were about to enter. In the first battle, Hitler's unit suffered 3,000 casualties in 3 days. He experienced the cruelty of modern warfare firsthand. It was not just a contest between people, but also a clash between machines. Faced with steel and artillery, flesh and blood were no match. After witnessing the deaths of thousands, Hitler realized that life is a continuous, terrible struggle. However, he did not retreat, but instead displayed extraordinary courage. Hitler seemed naturally suited for war. He never complained about food or the harsh environment, almost never asked for leave from his superiors, and repeatedly survived perilous situations by volunteering for the most dangerous tasks. As a messenger, an extremely hazardous role requiring walking or cycling through the no-man's land between enemy and friendly lines under artillery fire, Hitler's luck was uncanny. Even as his comrades fell one by one, he emerged unscathed, narrowly escaping several times when the spot he had just left was hit by shells. Hitler's unit fought in the battles of Ypres, the Somme and Arras. His outstanding performance earned him the Iron Cross, one of the highest military honors bestowed by the German army, cementing his reputation as one of the German military's finest soldiers. Hitler's fanaticism towards war was extreme, and he could not accept the humanity and compassion in war. On Christmas 1914, when the German and British troops met in no man's land, shook hands, and sang Christmas carols together, Hitler was deeply repulsed, believing that there should be no such thing in war. He was equally unable to accept Germany's defeat, and his comrades knew that any defeatist talk would upset him. Whenever someone mentioned the possibility of Germany losing, he would firmly refute it, declaring, "The war will not be lost." However, as the war situation became increasingly unfavorable, Hitler also gradually sank into depression, often remaining silent for hours before suddenly standing up and muttering to himself. In October 1918, his luck ran out. In a gas attack, Hitler temporarily lost his sight, groping his way to the aid station. When he regained his vision, he found that Germany had been defeated. The country plunged into revolution and depression, mercilessly humiliated and exploited by the victors. This outcome was the complete opposite of what Hitler had expected when he enlisted. Not only had the war not led Germany to glory, but it had dragged the country into the abyss. Hitler could not accept this conclusion, and at night, he described his heart as filled with hatred. Forged by the crucible of war, Hitler's thoughts underwent a drastic change. He realized that his individual efforts on the battlefield were insignificant and could not influence the course of the war. In this vast conflict, a soldier's power was minuscule. From then on, he was determined to enter the political arena, understanding that only by standing at the top of the masses could he truly impact the world. On September 12, 1919, Hitler accepted an assignment from the army's political department to infiltrate a small organization called the German Workers' Party and investigate it. However, he soon discovered that what he truly wanted to do was to strengthen this party, not just complete the task. He rapidly rose to become the party's leader, renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. Within the Nazi Party, Hitler found that he possessed the gift of inspiring, incendiary oratory. He used captivating speeches to lead the masses, manipulate public opinion, and gradually expand the Nazis' influence. In the process of the Nazi Party's ascent to the highest power in Germany, Hitler's personal charisma played an irreplaceable role. To the common people, he was an attractive speaker who could stir their emotions with electrifying rhetoric. For the workers and veterans with relatively low cultural levels, he did not preach abstract slogans of freedom or fairness, but promised to provide them with jobs and dignity, while directing their resentment towards the Jews. In the eyes of his colleagues, Hitler was an untiring workaholic, throwing himself into his work with passionate fervor. His powerful appeal influenced those around him. Years later, German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop reflected at the war crimes trials. "If Hitler stood here and told me something, I would still obey him without hesitation." The social environment at the time also provided fertile ground for the rise of the Nazis. After the First World War, the German government had lost vast territories and was helpless in the face of the economic crisis. The enormous reparations imposed on Germany led to hyperinflation, with the German mark reaching a rate of 4.2 trillion to $1 in 1923. Many banks provided withdrawals by weight of paper currency, and pawn shops were piled high with the pawned jewelry of bankrupt families, while foreign hoarders and Jewish capitalists could ride in luxury cars. Against this backdrop, Hitler ascended the political stage. He preached racism, advocated for national inequality, and believed that for the prosperity of the German nation, other races could be sacrificed. He opposed democratic parliaments and supported the establishment of a dictatorship, calling for foreign aggression to plunder the wealth, food, and living space of other nations. His radical rhetoric resonated with the people in the social abyss, and the angry masses responded to his call. Prior to 1925, the Nazi Party was still a small party with only a few thousand members, but by the 1932 parliamentary elections, the Nazis had gained 230 seats, becoming the largest party in Germany. In the process of securing the support of the military and the industrial sector, Hitler easily won over the officers, as they shared a common war experience and hoped to restore military power. When dealing with the industrial elite, he focused on economic issues, seizing on the capitalist sphere of the workers' movement, promising that although the Nazi Party was nominally a socialist party, it would fully support domestic enterprises. After taking office, he began to rearm, bringing new opportunities for the industrial sector. On January 30, 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, just one step away from controlling the country. At the time, the Nazis did not have an absolute majority in parliament, and President Hindenburg still held the ultimate power, with the Communist Party as the Nazis' main opponent. Hitler used a fire in the Reichstag to swiftly eliminate all obstacles. On February 27, 1933, just 6 days before the national elections, a Dutch communist named van der Lubbe set fire to the Reichstag building. The true motives behind van der Lubbe's actions are still debated, with some believing it was an individual extremist act, while others think he was instigated by the German Communist Party. And there are even conspiracy theories that he was a pawn of the Nazis. Regardless of the truth, Hitler was the biggest beneficiary of this incident. After the fire broke out, Hitler rushed to the scene and declared it a communist plot. He outlawed the Communist Party, declared a state of emergency nationwide, and demanded a constitutional amendment to grant him unlimited legislative powers without the consent of Parliament or the President. After the fire broke out, Hitler rushed to the scene and declared it a communist plot. He outlawed the Communist Party, declared a state of emergency nationwide, and demanded a constitutional amendment to grant him unlimited legislative powers without the consent of Parliament or the President. Before the vote on the amendment, Hitler instructed the stormtroopers to arrest and suppress the communists. Without the opposition, the constitutional amendment was smoothly passed, and Parliament was then dissolved, with other parties subsequently banned one by one. After Hindenburg's death, Hitler merged the positions of president and chancellor into the single title of Führer, consolidating all power in his own hands. Under Hitler's rule, Germany's surface economy thrived. The state exerted centralized control over the economy, investing massive resources in public works projects and industrial development. From 1933 to 1938, Germany's national income increased by 81%, and the unemployment rate dropped from 20% to under 1%. By 1938, Germany's steel production was the highest in Europe, and its manufacturing sector accounted for 14.3% of the global total, exceeding the combined total of Britain and France. However, this prosperity was not enjoyed by all Germans. Hitler implemented ruthless racial policies, mercilessly eliminating dissidents, establishing concentration camps, and exterminating millions of Jews, Slavs, Romani, and others. During his 12-year rule, the Nazi regime killed over 17 million people. Women in Germany also faced extreme discrimination, as Hitler believed a woman's duty was housework and reproduction, severely limiting their employment opportunities and devaluing the entire gender. Furthermore, Hitler subscribed to social Darwinism, and in the name of creating a so-called superior race, he forcibly sterilized and murdered the disabled, the congenitally ill, and the mentally ill. These policies paint a picture of a political madman devoid of humanity. While Germany's economic development was also extremely unbalanced, by 1939, Germany's national debt exceeded the total annual budget, and the industrial structure was severely distorted, with military industry expanding 1,150% from 1933 to 1939, while consumer industries related to civilian life only grew by 43%. The data reflects Hitler's militaristic mindset, as he bound the entire German nation to the train of war, dreaming of achieving German hegemony through a world war. On October 14, 1933, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations, marking the first domino to fall, and the world embarked on a path towards war and destruction. The path chosen by Hitler. He planned to first break the post-war restrictions, especially the constraints on rearmament, and then through diplomatic means, to acquire as much territory as possible for Germany without resorting to war. Ultimately, Hitler ignited a world war in an attempt to establish German supremacy. This path was fraught with peril, and a single misstep could have resulted in total defeat. But he reached the final step before encountering failure, which is what makes it so chilling for posterity. In the next video, we will retrace the steps he took and witness the rise and fall of the Nazi Empire. That concludes the content of this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and follow. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue.